Hello everyone, my name is Zuhair and today I'm with Sarah. Sarah, please tell me what we are waiting today.
So we are hosting a roundtable conversation in honor of World Water Day called Watersource, Lifesource, and we have an artist, Cheryl Zubrak, a theologian, Irma Fastuik, and a biologist, Rachel Kraus, joining us today to talk about water and why we think that it is important for life.
And where we are today, where we are located today.
So we are at MHC Gallery, which is a university art gallery on campus at Canadian Mennonite University. And we currently have an exhibition featuring the work of Cheryl Zubrak called Between Waterlight that focuses on water and the space between the land, the air, and the water.
We will hear today a lot of information from the speaker, but I want to ask you the main point what we are discussing here. What is the most challenging in terms of water here in Winnipeg?
Well, I think our speakers today will lead us through the ways that water is so important to all our different ways of knowing and being in Winnipeg and in Canada and around the world. Rachel is a biologist, like I said, and her research focuses on parasitology and pollution and how it relates to wildlife habitat, to human health. Irma Fastuik is going to talk about how water in many different faith practices is an important conduit to spiritual themes. And Cheryl really talks about and brings in perspectives from working with Indigenous communities, from working with different land relationships between the land and the water, and from just a real human passion for being out in environments that are influenced by the water. She's an avid canoe and kayak enthusiast.
So, for the participant today, what you think this is the goal we need to achieve from this gathering? So, what's the main goal you would like for the participant to achieve in the end of this event?
Yeah, so the gallery here, we really believe that we learn and grow and respect each other through artistic expression. And we hope that by bringing together these different ways of knowing, the spiritual, the science, the artistic expression, that we can have some really amazing dialogue and be inspired to think about water in new ways and work together to think about these places and treat them with respect.
Wow. So my final question is, in Canada, this is the land of immigrants. So when they are coming with their background about the water, how we can educate them to appreciate, because they said we are the largest country. We have a clear water, not salted one. So why we have to care about the water? We have a lot of source. What kind of message to educate the new Canadian?
Yeah, I think that in thinking about water in these different ways that we are today, that's a great way to start, right? To think of these different ways of knowing and these different relationships that we can have with water. And I think by having important days like World Water Day, conversations like this, we can hopefully invite everyone in to participate in the dialogue in their own ways, in ways that are meaningful for them.
Thank you so much. So now we are jumping into the presentation. Stay tuned.
everyone. Welcome to MHC Gallery at Canadian Mennonite University. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Sarah. I'm the director here at the gallery, and today we are here to think about Watersource as a life source. And we really believe at the gallery that through artistic expression we can learn about, grow, and respect one another. So we're really excited to bring together many different ways of knowing and thinking today to mark World Water Day with all of you. So in a moment, I'll tell you a little bit more about these three amazing women who are helping us consider in many different yet interconnected ways the way that water is needed for life and our experiences of this life. A few notes about the structure of our roundtable today. Each of the women joining us have prepared a few ideas to get our conversation started. So they'll take a few moments to present their different perspectives going around the table through most of the hour, and then we'll have room for questions at the end. And of course, as we've talked about, you're welcome to respond to each other as you're presenting your ideas, and then we'll take questions at the end. So definitely hold on to those thoughts and those nuggets until the end. If you're new here, I hope you took a few moments to enjoy the exhibitions. We have Between Waterlight by Cheryl Zubrak, who I'll introduce in a moment, downstairs here. Upstairs, we have another exhibition called Brushstrokes and Blue Words by visual artist Pauline Aitken and literary artist Christine Stewart Nunez. I will mention that we have a whole series of special events for these two exhibitions. So the last one will be on April 6th, and that will be an ekphrasis workshop. So ekphrasis is writing from art, which is what the exhibit upstairs is about. So if you're interested, April 6th, 2 to 4 p.m., Christine Stewart Nunez, our literary artist, will join us to create a piece of art and help you create an ekphrasis poem. So you'll leave with both. You don't need any experience in either medium, and it'll be a really fun collaborative workshop. So please think about joining us for that. And of course, if you haven't been here before, you may not know that the gallery raises all our own funds to operate here on campus. So consider making a donation on your way out or checking us out online afterwards. So, introductions. I think some of you may know Cheryl Zubrak. She is a multidisciplinary artist and art educator. Water's been the foundation of her creative journey in many ways, and she'll tell you more about that in a second. Then we have Irma Fasduik in the middle. Thank you, Irma, for being here. Irma is an associate professor of biblical theology studies at Canadian Mennonite University, and her research interests have focused on the practices of the church and themes conveyed through those practices. She's particularly interested in rituals related to worship and baptism, as well as themes of power. And she's also worked as a pastor and university chaplain, and her commitment to peacemaking has led to participation in a number of reconciliation endeavors. So welcome. And finally, last but not least, we have Rachel Krause, who is a biologist and associate professor here at CMU. She's particularly interested in pollution and parasitology and its connections to water quality for wildlife habitat and for human health and justice. In the past, she has studied salmon habitat in the streams of BC, fish behavior along the St. Lawrence River near Montreal, and I'm sure she'll share more about her current research exploring climate change adaptation studies in Zimbabwe. So a whole range of things represented. So without further ado, maybe we'll start with Cheryl and move our way down, and you can each tell us a bit more about yourself and your relationship to water, how it's connected to your ways of knowing and working.
Thank you for being here and supporting me. Just a little bit about my background. I was a visual arts educator for many years, and have been exploring art since I was in grade 11. But it's always been a part of my life, but I haven't really been able to deeply focus on it until I retired. So these last 5 years have been quite rich for me in that regard. What I'd like to do is start by reading my artist statement. to give you some context for the work that I'm doing. As a white settler residing on Treaty 1 land, my awareness and understanding of Canadian Indigenous relationships, past and present, continues to evolve. I approach my interactions with the land and water through the lens of learning and respect. For many years, water and its surroundings have been the foundation of my creative journey as a source of inspiration, visual research, environmental and social consciousness, and creativity. Being out on the water in my kayak, paddling solo, is where my heart sings, where I find solace, and where I build my inner strength. This exhibition is a celebration of my journey over the past 4 years. I've been exploring natural bodies of freshwater from below the surface with video and photography. These investigations have led me to intriguing new discoveries in this space and place. Being on and sometimes in the water and focusing on the altered perspectives that the camera reveals has created opportunities for deeper questioning of my personal relationship with water, as well as our broader society's interactions with and dependence on this element. I'm curious about what is under the water, just below the surface, as well as about my own interactions with this environment. I'm intrigued by the visual effects that occur as I attempt to capture that elusive space between water and air, the betweenness. Viewing the world below the water's surface, as well as looking up and through it, provides a captivating perspective. Distortion, reflection, fractured light, and movement all play a role. Through my work, I'm discovering ways of seeing, contemplating, processing, and visually communicating. This body of work is also an expression of my sincere interest in the relationship between creativity, culture, and nature through the lens of water. I believe that the arts, science, history, and politics, and most likely faith, are not only interconnected, but also intrinsically connected with water. In our own backyards, locally and nationally, this interconnection has been shaped by colonialism. As the effects of climate change continue to become more apparent, we recognize that all are attached to that all are affected. These critical issues resonate under the surface of my creative exploration. My work is an expression of my experience with, understanding of, and connection to water. By capturing your attention with color, light, texture, and movement, I invite you to contemplate and consider the imagery, to find a connection to and reflect on your personal relationship with and your understanding of water. Water is an integral part of planet Earth. Water is the source of all life. Water is creative inspiration, and water is pure joy and delight. And I want to close with a quote by Robin Wall Kimmerer from Braiding Sweetgrass. I want to stand by the river in my finest dress. I want to sing strong and hard and stomp my feet with 100 others so that the waters hum with our happiness. I want to dance for the renewal of the world. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Irma Fastuik. I was going to start with an utterly different quote than yours, so excuse me.
Oh, no, that's good.
Mine has a bad word in it.
Okay. That's intriguing.
One of my favorite parables is one that's told by David Foster Wallace, and he talks about, and I'm sure you've heard this one, and I just keep coming back to it, where you have these two young fish that are swimming happily along, and they meet an older fish swimming the other way who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks at the other and says, "What the hell is water?" I love that story. And I realized that a lot of my career, my research, has been trying to answer, what the hell is water? For in light of baptism in the Anabaptist Mennonite tradition, which makes it even funnier. So I'm wondering why I'm here, because I'm not a biologist or an artist. I'm a theologian. I drink water, I like water, I swim in water, I kayak, I canoe, but then I'm guessing a lot of you do all those things as well. I'm deeply concerned about water, as I'm sure many of you are, particularly around access to water in Indigenous communities and other communities. But that doesn't distinguish me in any way to be here, but I'm guessing what has brought me here is the thinking I've been doing around baptism. It's been something that has preoccupied me for many years, and researching and writing and interviewing about. And I've argued for some time what makes baptism significant is water, and to try and figure out what that means. And of course, baptism is one of the most primitive, primal of all Christian acts that Christians have been engaging in. And it's what brings people into a Christian community. It used to be, you'd say, how do you know someone's Christian? Are they baptized? Either as a child or somewhere. And it's one of those defining practices. Now that's shifting, I think, and I don't want to go there right now. But my particular interest in water actually began at a congregational meeting in my church. They were talking about baptism. I think it was one of those, like some of the young adults wanted to be immersed, and we were doing pouring, or more literally dripping drops of water on people's heads, which was not very significant symbolically. And so the church was just wrestling with this use of water in baptism. And then a couple of people said basically the same thing. I don't know why we're arguing about it. It's just water. It's just water. And I found myself just angry because it is just water, but don't you understand the significance of what water is doing here? And it was that Anabaptist Mennonite Free Church sensibility, oh, the symbol isn't really important, it's what's in the heart that matters, but the water and all those are all, and I really took issue with this. And it's particularly ironic for those of us who any of us who come out of an Anabaptist Mennonite tradition or an adult baptizing tradition, because the strange irony is that water is where it all began. A group of people in Felix Muntz and Connor Grable's living room and George Blaurock's house, you know, being moved, spiritually moved, to the point that they poured water on each other's heads. And then the water kept pouring and pouring and ended up within 5 years in the ironically watery drowning death of many of these people through martyrdom. Why? Because they poured water on each other's heads. But you know what? Don't worry about it. It's just water. It's no big deal. It's just water. So you're capturing some of my thing is to try and bring this theological spiritual meaning to something which they say, oh, it's no big deal. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, so yes, I am a biologist, and I'm going to talk a little bit later about the significance of water for life. Maybe that's an obvious statement. It is an obvious statement. But I've also found that in my own research practice that it has all happened against the backdrop of water. So I'm just going to tell you about a few different areas of work that I have been involved with and the significance of water for that. So I'm an ecologist, which means that I'm interested in organisms and how they interact with each other and their environment, which very often is water. And in fact, most of my ecology has happened in watering environments. So I've done lots of work looking at rivers and trying to figure out whether a river is, I'm going to use in air quotes here, healthy, is a tricky business, right? Because rivers are moving. The water that I measure here in this point right now is not the same water that will be there in a moment, right? Or in a year, or in, you know how rivers work. I don't have to tell you. So how do we figure out if the rivers that we share our territories with are healthy? And one of the ways that we can do that is by looking at the other animals that live there, particularly the ones that are emerged in the water for long periods of time. So we, in river ecosystem habitat assessments, we look specifically at the insects that live there. Some of them live there for a few months or for a few years. And so you can get a picture of what has been happening in the river by who has been able to live there all of this time and develop all of this time. Right? So some insects that you're probably familiar with, dragonflies, damselflies, mayflies, fish flies that come out at various points of the year, they spend most of their lives in the river. And they can't do that if the water is not clean enough. So we use them as sort of indicators of water quality in these more complex kinds of ecosystems. Done that in Canada, here in Manitoba, on the west coast. Sarah already mentioned, but I'm also doing it in Zimbabwe right now. We're looking at how climate change has led to reductions in water, changes in precipitation, losses of wetland habitat, which are inundated. They're wet habitats that do a tremendous number of things for human communities, other species, but only if they're allowed to remain sufficiently wet. So that's one area of my research. Related to that, I'm also interested in parasites. Sarah mentioned that. And I think we think of parasites as being kind of icky things that maybe we don't want, but in ecology we say healthy ecosystems have healthy parasites. They're part of the whole web of life. So I look specifically at parasites in fishes because those parasites spend some time in the fish, but they spend some time in snails, they spend some time in other kinds of fish, or frogs, or bears, or birds, and they spend some time just swimming around in the water as these very delicate, vulnerable stages. And so we can also tell a lot about water quality of habitats by looking at those fish parasite dynamics as well. And finally, I do also care about human health in my work, and you probably already know this too, that many of our most common diseases we get from contaminated water. So I was trying to find some stats on this morning. Approximately 2 billion people around the world depend on sources of drinking water that are contaminated. Some of the biggest sources are risk for mortality in young children in developing parts of the world are related to waterborne diseases, diarrheal diseases in particular, or they're tangentially connected through having water access for hygiene practices and sanitation. So we don't think about that too often here in Winnipeg. Every once in a while, though, we hear about a sewage pipe break, more often than it should. Or we hear about our neighbors in rural indigenous communities in the province who don't have access to the quality of water that we should all be able to have access to. So that's another area of my research.
Thank you all. So I'm already hearing all kinds of really interesting points where we can connect. I was particularly thinking about the words healthy and vitality kind of came to mind as all of you were speaking about your different relationships with water, which I think will tie in nicely to our next question, but also just the interconnectedness of all things in that relationship. The interconnectedness of water and land and air, the interconnectedness of wetlands as these liminal spaces where things are changing, and the connections between water and other spaces and other ways of knowing. So, without further ado, and feel free to ask each other questions too if you want, why do you think water is important for life? Let's unpack that a little bit.
So why is water important for life? I don't know how to answer that question. It's so big and so deep. But recently, I was asked the question, what do you think about when you're making your art? And I want to try and answer the first question by answering this question and see if we can get around to Sarah's question. As I've stated before, and I think you understand this now, what's really important to me is that paddling is central to my work. Being on and in the water is the life force of my artistic practice, so I just want to reiterate that. What do I think about when I'm paddling? I think about my personal strength and endurance. I think about the gratitude that I have for the privilege of being able to be on the water. I think about my personal relationship with water, the inner peacefulness that it brings me, how it's calming, how if I'm dealing with anything major in my life, that's a place I can process. It connects me to something far greater than myself, and I think in a way, although I'm not an institutional person in terms of where I practice what I believe in, I think I'm still connected to faith. And I think my good friend Donna would agree with me. She affirms me in that area. My reverence for this space and this place of being on the water, and also the awareness of the power of water. It's a giver of life, but it's also a taker of life. So that is also on my mind when I'm out paddling. Moving beyond myself to the bigger picture, I think about the history of the place. Who has access to this water and who doesn't? And who did but doesn't any longer? I think about the geology of the area, the cultural history, current and past, and the history of ownership of land. It's quite loaded now when we think about it, especially when I go out to Lake of the Woods. And I remember as a child with my parents going to an island to camp. It was a huge adventure for us. And on that island, on this little island, which was paradise for me, was actually an Indigenous fishing camp. And the racks were set up where they dry the fish. And I had no concept of this, but it's something that has stuck with me all these years about what else happened on that island, who else was having their life sustained there and living there freely until we arrived. And I think about how people treat water now, especially when I'm in the cottage area. I also think about it from a scientific point of view, although not super sciencey, but somewhat, because we're all inquirers and we're always asking questions. I think about the shorelines and how they've been formed, the aquatic life, the flora and the fauna, and the quality of the water. And so there's these connections to science that still have me as an inquirer wondering about them. As an artist, I think about, well, where might I video and what might I discover? I think about the light and the reflections that I'm getting, the currents in the water movement, and the water quality. What's living in the water? What should I leave in and what should I sort of Photoshop out a little, those little spots that are likely little organisms. And then the question that drives my creative inquiry is, what might this betweenness reveal? the betweenness of air and water. Water is a lens to another world, and the magic. Like the first time I used my cell phone in this little waterproof case, which you can get at Cabela's, for like, I don't know, $25. It's not very expensive. And the first time I put it in the water, I was on a friend's dock, and there was water lilies all around it, and I put it in, and I know there's all those wonderful nature shows out there, but when I did it myself and I videoed, I put it in the water and pulled it out and looked at the video, it was like, my mind just blew up. It was so exciting to see what was living underneath the surface that we're used to looking down at. It was just a really beautiful moment that has stuck with me ever since. There's such mystery down there. I will say the third time I was videoing, I actually caught a fish, like swimming by. That doesn't happen very often. And lastly, while I'm out paddling, I think about the weather. I think about not getting lost. And for heaven's sakes, I think about not letting go of my phone. And then when I'm back in the studio, I'm thinking about all the things that artists think about: composition, light, problem solving, juxtaposition of ideas. What am I trying to say in this journey that I'm on? And why am I making this art? Why is all this happening? There's always a lot of questions. So water connects me to my inner self, and it connects me to the bigger picture of life, including the past and the present. And to quote Métis artist Christy Belcourt, who has made this message central to her work, water is life. And she makes the most amazing art, so check her out.
Water is taker of life. One of the hardest things in my research has been that in the New Testament, the most common way that baptism is described is drowning. And I'm petrified of water, and I'm petrified of drowning, and to have that be my primary, image is water takes our lives. We drown in it. Anyway, it's a challenge. I think what's been said by Cheryl, I'm guessing we're all going to resonate with this in various versions, but the recognition that there's a relationship with water that goes beyond hydration. It's more than, and even more than dignity and justice, although clearly, this is not to diminish that, but that there's yet another thing going on with water. It's spiritual, it's mysterious, I don't know where to put the words on, that somehow water has this capacity to open us up to the meaning of life, of existence, of identity, of who we are, which is something peculiar and beautiful at the same time. I find it fascinating that the symbol of water, or the metaphor of water, is used in many religions and spiritualities. This is not a unique Christian baptism. Like, it shows up everywhere, and Indigenous peoples is a really good example of that. It's often a sacred element in religious practices, just generally. Water is. It's sacred, as was said, for Indigenous peoples. It's alive. It holds a spirit. In Taoism and in Sufism, water, they imagine that water contains the seeds of life. So maybe this is what Rachel's getting at, that the seeds of life are being carried by water, and so it takes on this sacred being. Right now, of course, as many of you, I'm sure, are following what's going on in Israel-Palestine and Gaza. The thing which I'm hearing in a number of essays I've read recently is the theme of water is life, that it's a very common phrase among Palestinians in the area of Gaza. And it's a belief based on the Quran that God created all living things out of water. So water is the essence of life and is going on. And I want to come back to the Gaza thing at the end as well. But to recognize that there is the power of the symbolic, the power of water to bring us into an imagination, a way of seeing, is present in religion and in spiritualities. And it doesn't identify just with race or culture, ethnicity, or any one particular religion, yet appears to show up all over the place. What's with that? That would be worth talking about. Why is this going on? In the Christian tradition, which is, again, is where I've wrestled and worked with this the most, water is considered a precious gift of God, of the Creator. It symbolizes healing and cleansing and spiritual insights, drinking from the deep well, Jesus and the conversation of the Samaritan woman. The scriptures emphasize living water, particularly the river or spring of water, which is seen as a source of life, of vitality, and it goes on. Water frequently appears connected to spirituality and faith and religions. And again, I don't know the answer, and you may well want to take a run at this. But what catches me is the remarkable mystery that water remains to us. And I'm guessing it draws many of us to it. We don't understand it. From the time you first float, how is it this water that runs through your hands allows you to float in? It makes no sense. But there's this mystery and this wonder, its beauty and its ability to bring death, to change, to transform. It captures us. And there's something about that. And I love that in baptism, because in baptism, again, I had enough conversations with traditions. Baptism works like this, and you do this, you get baptized, and a t-shirt and said, I earned my baptism, because I did all the right things. And it misses the mystery and wonder that there is something going on in this ritualized action that is more than we can name, more than we can see, that is more than we can even comprehend. And it's why water is so significant, because it brings us into mystery. I don't know. I don't know. And yet I trust in what is happening here. Oops. This is my first go at trying to use a tablet, because I'm trying to save paper, but I did print it. Because I don't trust a tablet. So this is why I think water remains important, at least from a theological. Again, I don't want to take away from the ecological and other concerns, but to highlight the symbolic and the power of the symbolic of the mystery that gets created by use of water. But one of the things, I'll just say one last thing, one of my favorite theologians is a theologian, William Willimon, and he once said, what we all believe about water is what Christians believe about baptism. What we all believe about water is what Christians believe about baptism. For example, we believe water washes us. We believe water, the purifying, renewal, washing part. We depend on water, and Christians too have talked about this deep dependence, how water brings us into a community, and that we cannot be Christians apart from a community where we receive our identity, we depend on. Water connects us. No one gets baptized alone, nor do we baptize ourselves. We always receive baptism from someone else, or a community, or God. We receive it as a gift. We talk about receiving baptism. And finally, as I said, the most common way of talking about baptism is to talk about it as drowning. In baptism, we find Christ's life in water. There's one body, one spirit, one God, faith, one baptism. In baptism, the Spirit through water draws us into God's life, is really what Christians are saying. We're drawn into, we're buried and brought up into God's life, and we're reborn as members of one another. And I love that, that suddenly I'm reborn, now connected to this community and to this world, and water brings us there. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. Irma, you said water is where it all began, and I would say that is true. Yes, we can't talk about life on Earth without talking about water, and in fact, there is no life without water, maybe on another planet somewhere, but it's hard to imagine a more perfect solvent for all of the things, all the reactions that make us alive. Water has some unique and important properties. It's not just any old liquid, right? A lot of the special things about water has to do with its own affinity for itself. So this fact of water sticking together, right, is why, Cheryl, we see these interesting patterns, for example, in the surfaces and the ripples that you've recorded here. It also sticks to other things. So that's why in biology we always start in first year, very beginning of first year, talking about water, actually, this non-living component that makes up all of life. Right? It's the stickiness, if you will, of water that allows it to play this central role, dissolve all sorts of really interesting things in it, and have interesting kinds of reactions happen in it. So if we start with ourselves, our bodies are made up of 60-70% water, depending on the body that you have today. And that water isn't just inert, right? It's not just filling space. It's bathing all our internal organs. And depending where you find that water in the body at a given moment, it has different things dissolved in it. It's doing different things. It's playing different functions. It's circulating around our bodies, all of us right now as we sit here, as the main components of our blood and lymph. It's carrying oxygen and nutrients to all of our cells and taking away carbon dioxide and metabolic waste products so that we can continue to be alive. We find water in the vitreous of our eyes and the cochlea of our ears as the fluid that bathes and interacts with all our sensory systems. Each of our organs processes fluids. Our heart mechanically, for example, our kidneys chemically, with just extraordinary elegance. Much of our brain is made of water. And even the solid parts of our brain they're cushioned inside and out with ventricles that are filled with fluid that's continuously circulating and allowing the brain to expand and contract within what we think of as a pretty sealed off vault in our skull. It's the solvent in which we mash up all our food in our mouths when we eat, carries our digestive materials through our digestive systems, and it's the osmotic exchange or movement of water from gradients of lower to higher amounts of stuff in it that is the basis for most of our digestive function. So these automatic things that water does because of its very nature. Interestingly, our lungs is maybe the one place where we don't always want water. And in fact, so we've got these exchange surfaces where we trade carbon dioxide for oxygen, these alveoli. They're only a cell thick, and the body has to create a special surfactant to keep that otherwise ubiquitous water from flooding in those surfaces and interfering with our lung function. Even our bones, which we think of as these really solid structures, are more than a quarter water, right? Filling canals, bathing the marrow of our bones, and bathing the outside of our bones as well. And it's not just us humans who are animate walking ponds. It's all living things, right? And in fact, all water, all life started in the water, and it stayed there for the first few billion years of life on Earth. Because only in the last maybe 500 million years, not a long time in the life of our planet, right, that fungi, plants, animals started making their way out of the water and onto the land. So today, still, most of the space for life is underwater, and there's more life under the water than there is on land. The number of species in all of these places is much harder to estimate. But I think we could say living on land is rather an odd thing to do on a planet like Earth. And finally, I would argue that none of us land-living animals have really completely left the water. Right? We still all start our lives in water, in the amnion of our mother's wombs, for us mammals, or in the tiny ponds that make up the internal environments of eggs. Or there's also lots of terrestrial animals that never quite cut the cord with water. They still return to the water to lay their eggs. Amphibians, many insects like the dragonflies we've already talked about, terrestrial crabs, various other creatures. Water is life. Water makes life possible. All right, the fact that it's symbolic in so many ways that we've heard about, I think, is not at all surprising.
Thank you all so much for those thoughts. I was really struck how, as I listened to each of you in your own ways, it's amazing how water does the same thing, whether we're thinking about our physical body or a body of water. Yeah, even language has these symbolic ties. All the way through to the divine, and the water is doing the same things in all these places. And I also was thinking about the stickiness of water and just the fact that we all are so drawn to it, like even our cities and our communities spring up around the stickiness of water. So maybe we'll just take a few moments for one last thought from each of you. Since you've told us why it's so important, what should we take from that? Is there an action or an inspiration or a point to take home with us today? And then we'll open the floor up to questions.
I'll try and keep it short. I'm just reflecting on what both of you have said. Many years ago, I was swimming with my daughter at the lake. She was just a young teenager. And she said to me, in the most reverent way, she said, "Mom, when I'm swimming in a lake, I feel like I'm swimming in the womb of Mother Earth." And that has never left me. You know, the words of wisdom from our young folk, from our young children, it just resonates so deeply, and it continues. When you talk about where water is where life, where it all began. So my takeaway is for you, or for all of us, it's my hope that my work is a form of reciprocity by sharing my creative exploration with you, the viewers. I hope that in turn you will make a connection to your own relationship with water and ponder it a little more deeply. So I'd love for you to leave the gallery seeing the world just a little differently. And I'll leave it at that.
I guess I've always argued that what makes practices of the Christian faith, communion, Eucharist, baptism, practices of peacemaking, what these, or say the rituals, like the ritual of baptism, that within the ritual, like we make the mistake of thinking that the ritual is an act of time. Like baptism happened, I got baptized on February 8th, that it's an event in time. And we miss the fact that the thing about a ritual like baptism is it actually contains with it the contours of how we need to live life as people of faith. And so then the question is, what are the waters of baptism, the waters of faith, telling us about how we should live, what we should do, how we should be? And I'm drawn into wondering what it's pointing us toward. And maybe it's me because I have too much time to read right now. I am just horrified by what's going on right now in Gaza. And the whole, Israel-Palestine situation, of course, but particularly the situation. And there's this tendency somehow to see like our spiritual practices as that, and this is the social justice part. But saying that a person, as a person who've come out of the waters of baptism, I need to be concerned about those who don't have access to water, who we need to push against anything that says we don't need you. We don't, these people don't need each other, because baptism reminds us that we depend on each other and we require each other and we need each other. And so this water is life, when I read that in the Christian Century recently, a description of what was happening and what they called a water apartheid, where you had certain groups of people were restricted from water and others had access to it, and where it was just shut out from whole groups of people, and saying, this is a baptismal issue for me. This is about what the waters of my baptism, the baptism of those who come out of the faith, that we need to be concerned about this breaking apart. And I guess this is all to say, is to keep asking ourselves, what are the waters asking of us? What are they saying to us? What are they speaking to us? And what are they calling us to? And so, anyway.
Yeah, thanks for that, all of that. And I would add, Irma, too, that the question of water in Gaza is not something that started in October either, right? It's often been described as a conflict over water. Mm-hmm. So I would just close my own part by saying that water is ubiquitous, and so I think sometimes it's hard not to take it for granted. But when we do that, we get ourselves into all sorts of trouble. If we're paddling, if we're thinking about environmental issues and environmental justice, and other issues related to reconciliation and justice and peace.
Thank you to everyone for being here today, for sharing your perspectives on water as life, and I look forward to many more wonderful conversations.
Sarah, wow, this is an amazing information. Thank you very much for having me today. What will be your final word in the end of this event?
Well, I hope that there's been something inspiring through the conversation that you can take away and maybe put into action in your own life, in your own community, and I hope maybe you're inspired to look at water in a different way, just like our artist in the gallery right now, Cheryl Zubrak, has done through her art practice.
Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you get all the information what you are looking for in this celebration in the Water International Day. Stay tuned for more stories like this. This is Zuhair. Bye-bye.